The steel hull of the USS Maritime groaned against the Pacific swells, carrying its cargo of captured souls across an ocean that had become a graveyard for both nations. Below deck, in converted cargo holds that smelled of salt and oil, sat 237 Japanese women. Nurses, radio operators, clerks, teachers conscripted into military service. All now prisoners of a war that had consumed the world. Yuki Tanaka pressed her palm against the cold metal wall, feeling the vibration of the engines through her fingertips. 24 years old, trained as a pharmacist in Kyoto, before the war swept her into military hospitals across the Pacific Theater. Her hands, once steady enough to measure precise doses of morphine, now trembled constantly. Fear had become her only companion during these 17 days at sea. Around her, women sat in clusters on wooden benches, their faces hollow with exhaustion and dread. Some prayed silently, lips moving in whispered sutras. Others stared at nothing, lost in memories of families they might never see again. The propaganda films played in their minds on endless repeat. American soldiers with demon faces, tearing prisoners limb from limb. Stories of torture so creative, so barbaric, that death seemed preferable to capture. "Do you think they'll separate us when we arrive?" whispered Sachiko, a former schoolteacher from Osaka who had served as a communications officer. Her glasses sat crooked on her nose, one lens cracked from when guards had roughly searched them after capture. Yuki didn't answer immediately. What could she say? That the Americans would probably execute them all? That they'd be starved in cages like animals? That was what every official broadcast had promised. The enemy knows no mercy. The enemy delights in cruelty. Better to die than surrender. Yet they had surrendered. When their field hospital in Saipan was overrun, they had no choice. The doctors had burned their papers and told the women to run, but there was nowhere to go. The island was a trap, surrounded by ships and soldiers. So they waited, huddled in a cave, until American voices called them out in broken Japanese. "I think," Yuki finally said, "that we should prepare for the worst and hope we die with dignity." Sachiko's hand found hers in the dim light. Both women's palms were clammy with fear. Above them, footsteps crossed the deck. American voices called out commands. The engine pitch changed, slowing. Someone near the front of the hold began to cry, a low, keening sound that spread like contagion. Soon a dozen women were weeping, though most did so silently, tears streaming down faces that remained eerily still. An interpreter, a Japanese-American soldier named Private Yamada, descended the ladder into the hold. The women fell silent, watching him with a mixture of hope and hatred. He was a traitor, they had been taught, a Japanese man who had chosen America over his heritage. Yet his face was kind as he looked at them. "We are arriving at San Francisco Harbor," he announced in perfect Japanese, his accent carrying hints of California. "You will be processed and then transported to an inland facility. Follow instructions. Do not resist. You will not be harmed." The words seemed impossible. Not be harmed? What kind of trick was this? "Is it true?" An older woman called out, a former head nurse named Keiko who still carried herself with authority despite weeks of captivity. "Is it true that Americans torture their prisoners?" Private Yamada's face softened with something like sadness. "No," he said quietly. "That is not true. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will have food, shelter, and medical care." "Lies," someone hissed from the back. "American lies." But Yuki saw something in the young soldier's eyes, not cruelty, not even anger at being called a liar, just a deep, weary compassion. It confused her more than anything else could have. The ship's horn blasted 3 times, announcing their arrival. The hold filled with the sound of shuffling feet as women stood, straightening their dirty uniforms, trying to maintain some shred of dignity. Yuki's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. Whatever awaited them on American soil would begin in minutes. They climbed the ladder one by one, emerging into blinding California sunshine. Yuki's eyes watered as she stepped onto the deck, unable to see clearly for several moments. When her vision adjusted, she gasped. The harbor stretched before them, massive and impossibly busy. Ships of every size filled the water. Cranes lifted cargo containers. Trucks rumbled along distant roads. And beyond it all, the city of San Francisco rose in layers of white and pastel buildings, climbing hills toward a brilliant blue sky. It looked nothing like the bombed-out wastelands she had expected. Where were the signs of suffering? Where were the desperate, starving citizens her propaganda films had promised? Instead, she saw a city thriving, humming with industry and life. The cognitive dissonance made her dizzy. "Form lines," an American officer called out. His voice was firm but not cruel. "2 lines, please." The women shuffled into formation, muscle memory from military training overriding their fear. Yuki found herself in the front, close enough to see the faces of the American soldiers who would process them. Young men, most of them, with sunburned noses and tired eyes. They looked remarkably normal, human. One soldier, barely 20 with red hair and freckles, caught her staring. He didn't sneer or spit. Instead, he nodded slightly, almost respectfully. Yuki quickly looked away, her mind reeling. None of this matched what she had been taught to expect. The processing began. One by one, women stepped forward to have their names recorded, their photographs taken. American nurses, actual women in clean white uniforms, stood nearby with clipboards. They smiled. They actually smiled at the prisoners. When Yuki's turn came, the nurse who examined her introduced herself as Lieutenant Patricia Morrison. She had brown hair tucked neatly under her cap and eyes the color of chestnuts. "I need to check you for injuries or illness," Lieutenant Morrison said through an interpreter. May I? May I?" The question stunned Yuki into silence. She was a prisoner, a defeated enemy. Why was this American nurse asking permission? "Yes," she managed to whisper. The examination was gentle, professional. Lieutenant Morrison's hands were warm as she checked Yuki's pulse, looked into her throat, palpated her lymph nodes. When she discovered the infected cut on Yuki's arm, hidden under her sleeve, she clucked her tongue sympathetically. "This needs treatment," she said. "We'll get you to the medical tent first. You've also lost significant weight. When did you last have a proper meal?" Yuki couldn't answer. Her throat had closed with emotion she didn't understand. This enemy nurse showed more concern for her well-being than her own commanding officers had in the final months of the war. The medical tent was spacious and clean, filled with cots and supplies. A doctor, an older man with gray hair and gentle hands, cleaned Yuki's wound and bandaged it properly. He gave her pills for the infection and a small card with instructions in Japanese for how to take them. "You'll be fine," he assured her through the interpreter. "The infection is minor. Just take the full course of antibiotics." Antibiotics. Yuki had spent the last year of the war treating soldiers with infections that became gangrene, amputating limbs that might have been saved if only they'd had proper medicine. And here, the Americans were giving their enemies antibiotics without hesitation. After medical processing, the women were led to trucks. Not cattle cars or cages, but actual transport vehicles with seats and canvas covers to shade them from the sun. American soldiers helped the older women climb aboard, offering hands and steady arms. No one shoved, no one shouted. Yuki sat near the back of her truck next to Sachiko and a young woman named Hana who had been a radio operator. As the convoy began to move, they watched San Francisco pass by through the gaps in the canvas. What they saw defied everything they had been told about America. Children played in parks, chasing balls and flying kites. Women pushed baby carriages down clean sidewalks, stopping to chat with neighbors. Shops displayed goods in windows, more abundance than any of them had seen in years. Cars, so many cars, filled the streets in an orderly flow. People looked well-fed, well-dressed, unhurried. "This cannot be real," Hana whispered. "It must be a show, staged for our benefit." But the convoy covered miles, passing through different neighborhoods, rich areas with grand houses, middle-class streets with tidy lawns, even industrial districts where factories hummed with production. Everywhere the same pattern, life continuing normally, abundantly, without visible signs of the desperate wartime suffering they had been promised. Sachiko adjusted her cracked glasses, peering through the canvas. In Tokyo, we stood in line for hours for a handful of rice. My students fainted from hunger in class. And here, she gestured at a grocery store they passed, its windows displaying pyramids of fresh fruit. Here they have everything. The implications were too enormous to process. If America had such abundance during wartime, what did that mean about Japan's chances of victory? What did it mean about the stories they'd been told? After 2 hours, the convoy left the city behind, climbing into rolling hills covered with farms. Yuki saw dairy cows grazing peacefully, crops growing in neat rows, farmhouses with smoking chimneys. A boy on a bicycle waved as they passed. Several of the women gasped. The boy had waved at them, at enemy prisoners, as if they were just people passing through. The camp itself appeared as they crested a final hill. But it wasn't the hellish prison yard Yuki had imagined. Instead, she saw what looked almost like a small town. Rows of wooden barracks painted white, a large mess hall, a medical building with a red cross on the roof, recreation yards with volleyball nets and basketball hoops, gardens with vegetables growing, all surrounded by fences, yes, and guard towers, but the overall impression was of order and cleanliness rather than brutality. The truck stopped at the main gate. As the women climbed down, an American officer stepped forward. He was older, perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair and a weathered face that suggested he'd seen his share of war. When he spoke, an interpreter translated his words into Japanese. "Welcome to the Presidio Relocation Center," he said. His voice was firm but not unkind. "I am Colonel William Harrison, commanding officer of this facility. You are prisoners of war, and you will be treated as such according to international law and the Geneva Convention. That means you will receive adequate food, shelter, clothing, and medical care. You will be given work assignments, but nothing that aids the American war effort. You will be allowed to write letters home, though they will be censored. You may practice your religion freely. You will not be mistreated, harassed, or abused in any way. If you have complaints or concerns, you may bring them to your barracks leader, who will bring them to me. Do you understand?" The women stood in stunned silence. This speech bore no resemblance to the treatment they had expected. Adequate food, religious freedom, the right to complain. It seemed like an elaborate fiction. "I understand this is confusing," Colonel Harrison continued, and something in his voice made Yuki believe he truly did understand. "You have been told lies about America, just as our soldiers were told lies about Japan. War makes monsters of us all in stories. But here, you will be treated with the dignity that all human beings deserve. I give you my word as an officer." He saluted them, actually saluted, then turned and walked away, leaving the women to be processed by their barracks leaders. Yuki was assigned to Barracks 7, along with 19 other women. As they entered the building, she braced herself for squalor. Instead, she found a clean, simple dormitory. 20 beds with actual mattresses, pillows, and blankets. Footlockers for personal belongings. Windows with curtains. A potbelly stove for heat. At the far end, a small common area with chairs and a table. "This is better than the nurses' quarters at the field hospital," someone whispered. It was true. Yuki's last posting had been in a tent with a dirt floor, where she slept on a thin mat and shared space with rats. This barracks, meant for prisoners, exceeded the accommodations she'd had while serving her own military. Their barracks leader was an American woman named Mrs. Helen Kowalski, a stout middle-aged civilian with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. Through an interpreter, she explained the rules and schedule. "Breakfast at 7, lunch at noon, dinner at 6, roll call twice daily. Work assignments will begin tomorrow. Lights out at 10, but you're not required to sleep. You may talk, read, or do quiet activities. Bathhouse is that building there," she pointed through the window. "Open from 6 in the morning until 9 at night. Showers use hot water. Soap and towels provided. Any questions?" Hot water. The words seemed impossible. Yuki raised her hand hesitantly. "Yes, dear?" Mrs. Kowalski's face was encouraging. "Is it true? Hot water for bathing?" Mrs. Kowalski's expression softened with something like pity. "Yes, honey. As hot as you like. You'll each get 20 minutes. Use it well. You've been through hell. That night, after a dinner that left every woman staring in disbelief at her plate, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread with real butter, and even a small apple for dessert, Yuki took her turn at the bathhouse. The facility was simple but functional: individual shower stalls with curtains for privacy, hooks for clothes and towels, clean tile floors. And when she turned the handle marked with a red circle, hot water poured from the shower head in a steaming cascade. Yuki stood under that water and wept. She wept for the months of cold sponge baths and dirty uniforms. She wept for the patients she had lost to infections that proper hygiene might have prevented. She wept for her country, which had sent her to war without adequate supplies, while the enemy provided such luxuries even to prisoners. But most of all, she wept because everything she had been taught was crumbling like ash in her hands. Later, clean and dressed in the fresh cotton nightgown they'd been issued, Yuki lay in her bed with its soft mattress and warm blankets. Around her, other women settled into their bunks. Some talked in low voices. Others cried quietly. One woman prayed. Sachiko, in the next bed over, reached across the gap between them. "Yuki-san," she whispered. "I'm frightened." "Of what?" Yuki whispered back. "They've treated us well so far." "That's what frightens me," Sachiko said. "If they are this kind to enemies, what kind of people are they? And if they are good people, what does that make us?" The question hung in the darkness, unanswerable and devastating. Yuki had no response. She could only stare at the ceiling and wonder how everything she had believed could be so wrong.